Tanner was a 7-year-old boy playing baseball on his town's t-ball team in Florida. And one particular night, they were playing the crosstown rivals. Tanner got to play second base that night, and sure enough, one of the batters for the other team hit a screaming shot that took about 6 seconds to get to him at second base. Tanner fields the ball, knows he doesn't have time to go to first base, and so he just runs and tags the runner that's going from first to second base. Umpire makes the call, says the runner's out. The crowd cheers Tanner, and the runner goes back to his dugout, probably just thinking about who brought snacks that night more than baseball, to be honest. But Tanner knew that something wasn't quite right, because Tanner knew in his own mind that he did not make the tag. And so he walked up to the umpire and he said, "Ma'am, I didn't tag the runner." Well, the umpire, you can imagine, was a little bit shocked to have a kid say that to her. And so she asked him to repeat himself. He says, "I missed the tag." And so the umpire calls the runner back out, puts him on second base, and says the runner is safe. Well, Tanner's got a really good coach who understood what was taking place. And at the conclusion of the game, he was given the game ball that night for showing some honesty. The story really didn't start to develop until 2 weeks later. Tanner's team was playing once again against a different team that night. This time Tanner's playing shortstop. So it's a different team, but it's the same umpire. And again, a ground ball is hit towards Tanner, and he fields the ball, and he lunges to make the tag of the runner who's going from second base to third base. And this time he successfully makes the tag, but the umpire had a bad angle and thought that he had missed the tag, and so she called the runner safe at third. Tanner was disappointed, but he didn't say much about it. He just had that kind of dejected 7-year-old boy look, and he tossed the ball to the catcher so that he could put it on the tee for the next batter. And the umpire noticed that he just looked sad, and so she walked over and said, "Did you make the tag?" And Tanner said yes. That's all he said. Didn't argue. He just said yes. And so she changed her call. She looked at the runner at third base and said, "You're out." You can imagine the coach for the other team did not like the situation, and he started to complain, and parents in the stands started talking about Big Ten officiating or horrible umpires or whatever it would be. So the umpire walked over to the opposing team's bench and explained what had happened 2 weeks ago. And she told the other coach, "If a kid's going to be that honest, I have to give it to him." And that story picked up enough steam that within a few weeks, it was written about in the pages of Sports Illustrated under the title, "An Honest Kid." When I heard that story from another pastor a while back, two words went through my mind, two reactions. The first was, wow. In a society where we tend to read and hear about stories that remind us of the worst of humanity, it's just refreshing to see a kid be rewarded in that kind of way for simply telling the truth. But second, I thought, why? Why in the world did a story like this attract so much attention? Enough so that one of the greatest sports writers chose to devote a few paragraphs to something that seems so nice and so ordinary. Maybe it's because while it's definitely nice and it's one of those feel-good stories, it really isn't that ordinary. You know that we live in a world that's dominated by fine print. You need a magnifying glass and a degree in contract law just to know what you're reading half the time. At least 3 or 4 times this week, I had that situation where it popped up on my phone app or on a website that says, "We've changed the terms of our service." And you know you're just like me. You don't read that. You just click accept. Because you know that the translation is you lose. We watch political debates or speeches, and they've actually gotten to the point now where they have a ticker on the screen to show us how many times someone has stretched the truth. A boss maybe has said to you, "I swear the next promotion, the next raise belongs to you," but that promotion, that raise, it never really comes. A parent promises on a stack of Bibles, "I'll be at your next recital." or performance or game. But before it starts, you look up in the stands and you notice the seats where they would normally sit are still empty because things just got away from them and they got too busy. Maybe you loaned a buddy $50 based on their word that turned out to be a lie. The reactions, wow and why, to the story of that young ball player happened because deep down we see what's going on around us. What Tanner understood and what that umpire reinforced is that the reliability of your word means a lot. When we're honest, when we live up to the things that we've committed to, when we tell the truth even when it's not to our own advantage, we're just stacking blocks. We're making a structure that can stand the test of time, and when people in the front row aren't nervous like that thing's going to tip over. We've seen Dan up there before, and he tends to knock things over. And so we're building these blocks when our word is dependable, when our word is strong, and when people know that you're marked by the words dependability and trustworthy, authentic, reputable, truthful, and honorable. We're building something strong and sturdy, something that really will stand the test of the time. But on the flip side, we too often use words in ways that show that we're really just playing games. And it's not just what's been done to us. Too often, it's what we're doing to the people around us. We're part of the problem. We shade the truth to make ourselves look, just a little bit better. The taxes maybe aren't quite what they really should be. No, or maybe it's that you overpromise something to a customer knowing that you really can't deliver. Oh boy. You swear to your neighbor that you'll bring that tool back tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. Again and again and again, we fudge the truth in small and big ways, until we're left with a reputation that's anything but trustworthy, reputable, or honorable. If we're not careful, our integrity ends up looking like the craziest game of Jenga you can imagine, where the next block will absolutely cause you to lose. We're in this section of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount where he's going a little deeper to the core, to the heart of some things, some teachings that religious leaders had been teaching. And at some level, they're teachings taken straight from the Old Testament, from the law, but with all of them, they've been twisted just enough to make their meaning different than what God had intended. They've been turned upside down, and Jesus is doing the work of setting things right side up again. He's saying, in my kingdom, there's a better way to do life. There's a greater righteousness than what you've been taught. And over the last few weeks, we've read through, Scott's taken us through some really difficult topics of murder and anger, adultery and lust and divorce. We've seen that in all of these topics, our words, our thoughts, and our actions can have the effect of degrading, dehumanizing, and devastating other people. Maybe last week or the week before that, you felt like, thank God this is one that I don't struggle with. Or maybe you've read ahead and you're picking up on where we're going today, and you're thinking, okay, we can take a breath now. This one seems a little bit lighter, maybe a little bit easier. I think what we'll see this morning is today there's some equal opportunity toe stepping, because all of us have some area of life where we could grow as tellers of truth. And so Jesus picks that up in Matthew 5, starting in verse 33. He says, you have also heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. But I say, do not make any vows. Do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. And do not say by the earth, because the earth is his footstool. And do not say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not even say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black. Just say a simple yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. And so right away, just off the top, let's define the thesis that Jesus is addressing. Each week, Scott's been laying out the thesis, which is the existing big idea of the day, the antithesis, or the contrasting idea, the opposite of what that is, and then finally the synthesis, the combination of ideas that give us a new and better way of living. And so today, the thesis is simply be keepers of vows or oaths to people and God. And in this phrase, Jesus addresses several verses that have been lumped together, but also that have been twisted just enough so that they maybe mean what they were never intended to mean. Leviticus 19, verse 12 says, "Do not bring shame on the name of your God by using it to swear falsely." Numbers 30, verse 2 says, "A man who makes a vow to the Lord or makes a pledge under oath must never break it. He must do exactly what he said he would do." And then Jesus actually combines two of the 10 commandments. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God, and you must not testify falsely against your neighbor. Maybe you've heard that as thou shalt not lie. So early on, people would make these oaths, vowing before Almighty God, or as they would call him, Yahweh. And it was a really serious thing because to do that, you were saying something really, really important. You were saying, this you can take to the bank. I'm swearing on the name of God. And so they might say, I swear before the God of Abraham that I will return these oxen or donkeys or whatever by the end of the week. And if I don't, may I be devastated by a drought or smited by God in some horrific way. But people got tired of fearing the droughts or being smited by God in some way. And so they chose to change to these one-offs, things they thought were in the same zip code as God, but maybe wouldn't be so serious. And Jesus lists these things. He says, by heaven, by earth, by Jerusalem, and by the hair on your head, which seems kind of rude to me. Jesus takes this even further in Matthew 23. Speaking directly to the religious leaders, he says in verse 16, "Woe to you blind guides who say, whoever swears by the sanctuary is bound by nothing, but whoever swears to the gold of the sanctuary, oh, you're bound to your oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the sanctuary that has made the gold sacred? And you say, whoever swears by the altar is bound by nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that's on the altar, you're bound to that oath. How blind you are. For which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. And whoever swears by the sanctuary swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by the one who is seated upon it." You see, oaths weren't solving anything, as they could still be laced with dishonesty and embellishment or omission of important details. People were trying to make promises while at the same time writing down all of the fine print to protect themselves. Oath-keeping had become this game of, I want you to trust me, but I also need a way out. Pharisees and others were using oaths to confirm another person's faith in them, but also to weasel out of the promises that they had made. And it was this ultimate example of fingers crossed behind your back when you make a promise. And we still do it today. We say things like, as God is my witness, on all that is holy, or maybe you've had someone say, I swear on my mother's grave. And I think that when we hear someone say something like that, you automatically know that their word isn't worth very much. They're having to back it up with something other than just their yes or their no. If your trustworthiness were a credit rating, it's obvious who does and doesn't have a good track record. And so we use oaths as collateral to get what we want. The problem is we don't own any of those things. And so they can't be collateral. So what we're doing is we're asking God, we're asking his creation to co-sign. And that gets into some pretty serious business. People knew that their own word wasn't strong enough, so they throw in God's name or his creation. They play the God card in a last-ditch effort to get what they wanted. And there's a really ugly word that describes that. It's manipulation. I asked Google to define the word for me, trying to save a couple of minutes, and here's what I got: the action of manipulating someone. Come on, Google, you can't use a word to define a word. And so I looked it up in the dictionary, and it says to control a person or situation by artful, unfair, or insidious means, especially to one's own advantage. But the truth is, we don't really need the definition of the word because we all have experienced it many times, and sadly, from both sides. Tim Mackey from the Bible Project said, if I have to manipulate you to make myself seem more trustworthy, there's a fundamental breakdown between us. And Dallas Willard said, the essence of swearing oaths is about invoking something else to make your words seem more significant and more weighty. The aim is to impress others with your seriousness or your piety so that you get what you want. It's a device of manipulation or sin. It's all about getting your own way. I think we would all agree that there's not much more that we dislike than being manipulated. I hate it when it happens to me, but truth be told, I hate it more when I discover that I've done that with someone else. It's embarrassing to be caught in that moment where you realize you've used your words in some way to get what you want from someone else. Jesus goes really strong on this. He warns us that ultimately, when we use words in a scheming way, we are partnering with someone we don't want to partner with. At the end of the passage in verse 37, he says, anything beyond this, a yes or a no, is from the evil one. And of that evil one, here's what Jesus says in John chapter 8. He says, he has always hated the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it's consistent with his character. For he is a liar and the father of all lies. Well, the good news for us is that in Jesus, we can end that partnership and enter into a much better one with him where he will lead us towards better things. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul is writing to the people of Corinth, and he's talking to them about all these things that they had been prior to their relationship with Jesus. And there's some really ugly things mentioned in that chapter. But here's what he says in verse 11. And this is what some of you used to be. But you've been washed. You were sanctified. You were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and in the Spirit of our God. So Jesus launches here into the antithesis. He says, don't swear a vow or oath at all. Now understand, this doesn't mean that you can't sign your name on a loan for a home. And it doesn't mean that you can't testify in court when you're required to. And it certainly isn't a way for you to get out of jury duty tomorrow, right? Like, these are things that are given to us for our interpersonal relationships. In fact, Jesus later testified in court under oath himself. In Matthew 26, the high priest says to Jesus, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, it is as you said. What Jesus is telling us here is to do away with this interpersonal song and dance and to lean into the synthesis that he gives us here, which is simply mean what you say and say what you mean. To let your yes be yes and your no be no. To be the kind of people who think through what they say yes to and make commitments carefully, and then they follow through on those commitments. See, the real issue at play here is our integrity and the value that we place on other people. Our grandson, Kobe, just turned 1, and you can see that we've got a problem on our hands. He's already wearing a shirt that says, "I solemnly swear." Hopefully he hears these words today and throws that shirt away. He doesn't need to wear the shirt because when he's at our house, we can pretty well tell that he's up to no good. But when I think about him growing up in today's world and what it takes to make it and to make it well, I know that it really comes down to a few things that are the same things that it was for me, same things that it has been for you, for our kids, and for the people who came generations before us. First is that we follow the greatest command. You love the Lord your God with your heart, your soul, and your mind, and your strength. We love our neighbors as ourselves. But then there's 2 others that I've just told my kids over and over and over again. Show up on time and do what you say you will do. And if I want my grandson to embrace those things, if you want your grandkids, your kids, your neighbors, your coworkers, the people who have been rotten to you to embrace those kinds of things, it means that I go first. That I live my life out in this kind of a way, even when the people around me don't. We commit to being a people who let our yes be yes and our no be no. And it means that we need to be wise in our commitments. Sometimes we'll say things, we lack the courtesy to just tell people how we're really thinking. Can you help me move tomorrow? Yes, I can help you move. While in your mind, you're thinking, if all the stars align and I don't schedule a golf game, right? Let's try to get together this week. Even though you know that your schedule is jam-packed full, sometimes we'll say the easy thing rather than have to explain that we don't have time for some of those things. Or we go into people-pleasing mode and we promise things without really thinking it through. This is a tough one for me because I love it when people think well of me, right? I think you do too. For me, I'm an I. I'm a high I on the disc profile. It means I'm an influencer and I love it when people love what I have to say. On the Enneagram, I'm a 7, which means the enthusiast. I'm extroverted and optimistic and spontaneous. And one of my strengths in Strength Finder is woo. I don't even know what it means, but I think it means that I'm fun to be around, you know? And I like that. But sometimes if you wrap those 3 things together, it can lead to a whole mess for me in this area. And it hit me really hard when we were living in Omaha. I worked at the campus at UNO, which is right in the middle of town, and we lived out in Millard. At 2 a.m., it was about a 25-minute drive. You can do the math on what that might have been during rush hour. And my wife would call me, and she's just getting dinner ready, starting to do that, and wondering what time I'll be home. And I start doing the math in my head, and I'm like, okay, I'm about to start my last appointment. It should be done at 4:15, and then I'll pack up my stuff, my bag, and I'll take the 12-minute walk to my car, and I'll get in the car, and the traffic's going to open right up, and I'll get home in 25 minutes. I should be there by 5 o'clock. Well, the college students I'm meeting with has a little bit more to talk about, so we go 10 minutes long. I bump into someone else walking out of the building and talk with them and set up an appointment with them. And I make the 12-minute walk in 12 minutes, doing good, right? But then I get in the car and the 25-minute drive becomes 35, 40 minutes. And I look at the meter on the car and I realize I've got to stop and get gas. And I walk into the house at 5:45 to an unhappy family. And I just tell myself and my family that I was just being my optimistic self. I wanted them to be happy to hear that I would be home a little bit early. But the problem is that had become a pattern in my life. And it didn't take very long before my family knew that they couldn't depend on what I said. And I just kept taking Jenga blocks from my character, from my integrity. And my word just wasn't meaning what I wanted it to mean. It took some apologies and hard work, and it still does for me. I had to learn that the dependability of my word was more important than my optimistic outlook, and that my people-pleasing tendencies, if not backed up by action, is really hurtful. And then third, we're not realistic with our yeses. Some of us fall into this category where you'll say yes to anything because you want people to see that you're there for them, that you can do it. But you don't realize that you're saying yes to so many things that the quality of those yeses isn't very good. And you need to hear this phrase that I've said lots of times in my life. The quality of your yeses is determined by the quantity of your no's. If I overpack my schedule and double or triple book those hours, I'm saying less about my importance and more about how I view someone else. I told you today was going to be an equal opportunity, toe-stepping kind of day. We need to be people who say what we mean and mean what we say. Our words need to be backed up with action. And these words of Jesus, they're given to us as a gift. When we begin to live in the way that he's telling us to live, we begin to discover a Jesus-promised rhythm of life that's lived freely and lightly. We're not constantly trying to leverage words or people. We're not having to keep track of what little lie we told here and there. When our yes means yes and our no means no, we don't have to twist our words to get our way. We begin to look a little bit more like Tanner, the 7-year-old ball player. More importantly, we begin to look more and more like Jesus. He's our model in all of this. He set the example for us. He was in the garden the night before he was arrested, and he knew that he had made this commitment, that he had said yes to this grand plan of the cross. But there was a moment when he didn't want to fulfill that commitment. He knew what was coming: an arrest, a mock trial, beatings, a cross, ultimately a temporary separation from the Father that he had never been separated from. And he had that moment when he didn't want to do what he said he would do. He said, if there's any other way, may this cup be taken from me. But not my will, your will be done. And he took on every sin, every lie, every manipulation that has filled our lives. For you and for me. And we take this moment every Sunday to remember his death, his burial, and his resurrection. We thank him for what he's done, but we also ask him to continue to shape us more and more into his own image. In Third City, as people, let me just tell you this: we never give up on hope. We never give up on hope because he followed through on his promise. Hebrews 10:23 says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For he who promised is faithful. So God, we take this moment. We say thank you to you. We know that we've made our lives a mess time and time and time again. But grace has been there for us. And grace continues to be there for us now. So we thank you for being willing to carry through on the promise that you made, to go to the cross, to die the death that we deserve, suffer the separation that we deserve, so that we don't have to be separated from our God. Pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. In a message about honesty, I think I should just tell you, this one's glued together, right? But our souls, our integrity, our word, it's not. And maybe you think about Tanner and you're like, yeah, Tanner was 7. He hasn't been through what I've been through. He hasn't been wrong the way I've been wronged. Whatever that is, I've got this stack of blocks that's just laying all over the place. But what I can tell you is that grace and truth are equally important in your life. We need to be tellers of truth. We need to be people who recognize the truth of Jesus. But we know that if the blocks have been knocked over, it's just time to start stacking them again. It's just time to start building something that looks stable, something that doesn't need glue because your word is the glue. Let's be that kind of church. Let's not be that kind of church that doesn't beat people up when their life is a mess, but instead we help them up when they recognize their life is a mess and they want something better. Let's be that kind of church, a church that just starts stacking blocks again and again and again.